We are live on YouTube and live on Zoom.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Always nice to see some familiar names in the attendees section. Please take a moment as we welcome everybody into the Zoom room here to introduce yourself in the chat, and do make sure that that is sent to all panelists and attendees so that everyone in our webinar today can see your comments and your introduction. So we'll begin in just a moment, but welcome to the Summer 2021 K-12 Teaching Academy, hosted by the Lurie College of Education at San Jose State University. Hello, Dawn and Evangeline and Cynthia. Good morning, good afternoon again, Armin. Good to see you. And hi, Miss Endo. I always feel like someone famous, you know, when you have friends in the Zoom room with you. And hi, Prima and Jenny. All right. Well, for the sake of time, we are going to go ahead and just get started with a couple of housekeeping announcements here today. We are so glad that you're here with us. But for all of you who have friends who couldn't be here with us, don't forget that there is a recording of this event, and it will be available after today, or after our presentation today, on the K-12 Academy website. Captions are available to you now. If you just click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can click on that, and that will provide captions for you today. And then on the recording, there will also be captions as well. This is a traditional Zoom webinar, so your video and your audio are automatically turned off, but we'd love for you to use the chat to communicate with each other and our panelists, or presenters, I should say. So please do make sure that you have that turned on to panelists and attendees. And then just a little plug for our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. It's always nice to keep on top of the amazing speakers, presentations, and then opportunities that San Jose State provides at the Lurie College of Education. So do make sure that you have those things on your radar. The links are right there in the chat for you. Brian makes it nice and easy on us. So we have a really amazing presentation for you today. The title of it is Bringing Our Humanity to the TK through 5th grade classroom through an ethnic studies stance. And we have a lovely group of presenters with us here today. We have Leah Aguilera, who's a 2nd grade teacher in the Oakland Unified School District, Katy Felsinger, who is a TK teacher in the San Leandro Unified School District, Hannah Swernoff, who is a 5th grade teacher at the Piedmont Unified School District. And then we have Dr. Wanda Watson, who's an associate professor here at San Jose State in the Lurie College of Education. So thank you all, welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, so I am going to let you get started. I will share my screen to show the slides, and Brian will spotlight you, and we will get started today.
All right, so welcome everyone. As Becca mentioned, my name is Dr. Wanda Watson, Associate Professor at San Jose State University, and I'll have my colleagues introduce themselves as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Katy and I teach TK in San Leandro Unified. I'm here on Mwekma Ohlone land. Welcome everybody.
Hi everyone, I'm Leah Aguilera and I currently teach 2nd grade in Oakland Unified. I have taught a ton of grades, but I am in 2nd right now. And I will add on to Katy. This is the Huichin land in Oakland. The Lijan are the people, and to the Chucheño is our language here. And I will pass it on.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I teach 5th grade in Piedmont. And I'm also calling in from Ohlone land.
All right, so thank you everyone who came to be with us here today. Today we'll be talking about bringing our humanity to the TK-5 classroom through an ethnic studies stance. And just to give you a bit of context around that, we are a group of teachers. I'm a teacher educator, and we started this inquiry group back in 2016, 2017 to really think about what does it look like to integrate ethnic studies at the elementary school level in a transformative, liberatory way, moving beyond the basics of anti-bias education, but really thinking about issues of power, liberation, freedom, humanity, etc. And so today we're going to share some examples of the work that we've been doing in response to the call for this teaching academy and the frameworks that we've been using to draw from that work. So to call us all into community today, recognizing our connectedness, shared purposes, and taking a moment to pause, I think it's important to kick things off with a land acknowledgement. So I'm going to ask you to just slow down for a moment and enter this space with us as I read this out loud. Recognizing that ultimately we want rematriation, decolonization, and abolition, we commit to learning about and acknowledging Indigenous peoples of this land. As we gather on the land of Muwekma and Lishan Ohlone peoples, past and present, let us show love, humility, and gratitude, and be reminded that we are one with the land and with each other. Let us draw wisdom from our elders and contemporary teachers and communities as we engage collectively in our ongoing healing from the harm caused by colonization, white supremacy, and intersecting forms of oppression. We recognize that as a group that we're on this ongoing journey of embodying this acknowledgement. It's not only words, it's about action, it's about and collective resistance. So for more information, one resource we appreciate and value is the Segurite Land Trust. It's an urban women, Indigenous women-led organization here in the Bay Area, particularly in Oakland. And you can get more information at the link we've provided on the slides. And as we mentioned in the chat, feel free to click the link and acknowledge the lands that you're currently living on. Okay, so a bit of additional background. The teachers in this group, it's about 10 of us that meet consistently, sometimes once a week. The group that we have here today, we've been meeting weekly since, I don't know how long it's been at this point, but since spring semester maybe. And we came together back in 2016, 2017, and our work started out by sharing our narratives, unpacking what brings us to this work of ethnic studies, and then co-developing an ethnic studies framework. And we really wanted to get down to the essence of things and see this as fluid, ongoing work that we elaborate on through our relationships with students and families, our curricular development, etc. And so it's really been an inquiry-based process where we're asking questions, we're gathering information, we're self-educating, and we're coming back and thinking about student learning and our own growth and learning over time. So the framework at present contains 4 main components, and we start with this because this informs how we're looking at returning to the classroom in the fall after everything that's been going on. And so we center self and community love and knowledge, recognizing that at the root of freedom and liberation is love, understanding of self, understanding of others. We look at engaging multiple perspectives and developing empathy and understanding of others, recognizing that that's a precursor to true solidarity. And multiple perspectives, recognizing those that have often been erased in our society. And we often use that language from styles about mirrors and windows, seeing ourselves reflected, allowing our students to see themselves reflected, but also recognizing the perspectives across differences. And then ultimately also working to dismantle systems of power. And we'll talk a bit about how that comes in many different forms. It's deepening our inner work and understanding, and it's also making structural and systemic changes and speaking out. And Teacher does work that is ongoing. It's a lifelong process in order to continue to debunk our own assumptions and the ways that we might often reinforce modes of oppression, even as, you know, I'm a Black woman, recognizing that I have an intersectional identity that I need to work through as well. And we'll share more resources, but these were some of the main texts that we drew from to synthesize our own understanding of ethnic studies curriculum and pedagogy. And we also use the social justice standards as a reference point. And so we thought about how do we apply our ethnic studies framework to this call from the San Jose Teaching Academy around the restorative restart and thinking about returning to the classroom after, for many of us, something that's not really new, but the pandemic is new. And then just the collective reckoning with state-sanctioned police violence, anti-Black violence, and Indigenous ongoing, the ongoing presence of Indigenous genocide, and just the piece coming out and the reckoning with the schools and the murder of children, anti-Asian hate, a myriad of things. So how do we reckon with that as we launch the school year and really center our students' humanities, really create an environment where they feel seen and they see each other? And so looking at the work that was done by this collective, the Reimagine Schools Collective, we saw no separation. We could not separate centering relationships from making teaching and learning relevant and rigorous. And so we're looking at the intersection of those things, not only at the beginning of the school year, but across the entire school year. So then synthesizing the ethnic studies framework and the reimagining the school restart, together we came up with these three goals to guide our work as we continue through the summer. Yes, we're meeting through the summer, into the start of the school year and next school year. So the first goal was build a classroom community that humanizes students and values their intersectional racial identities, particularly those from Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian backgrounds. Learn about students' strengths, interests, experiences, and barriers to learning, and deeply integrate students' funds of knowledge, community cultural wealth into ethnic studies and anti-racist curricular and pedagogical practices to facilitate liberatory student learning. And again, all of these components need to work together in order to be meaningful, humanizing, and transformative. If you're hitting one of them, something is likely missing. And so we recognize that. And again, in the examples, we'll talk about how you might hit just one in one unit, but it's important to circle back to the other two as we think about the arc of the school year. Whew, okay, so then, and as you might be able to see if you're familiar with this, there's this kind of this backwards design approach to the work that we're doing, right? What is the purpose? What is the intent? You start with the overarching framework guiding the work. You break that down into goals, and then we further concretize that into essential questions and enduring understandings to guide the planning for the year and to really think about how do we communicate and translate this to student learning. And so we came up with these 4 essential questions, enduring understandings. I'll read the first, and then maybe you all can chime in, and I'll start to hand things over. So the first one is, who are we? And the enduring understanding is build knowledge and love of self and others.
The second one is, how are we connected? And the enduring understanding is recognize and value our interconnectedness with each other and all living entities, and build solidarity with others and across movements for liberation.
Number 3, what do we care about and why? Analyze the roots of systemic oppression and how they occur past and present.
And number 4 is how do we take action? And the enduring understanding is learn from the legacies of resistance, imagination, and social movements to educate, agitate, and mobilize.
So we're going to transition to looking at how across these grade levels, the developmental continuum, TK, second and fifth grade, these enduring understandings and essential questions get taken up. And we want to invite you, we'll have a couple of call to actions throughout, but we want to invite you to reflect on the purpose and intent of the choices that are made. So not only what's being done, but why it's being done and how it aligns with our goals, and then how they inform each other in terms of helping us to see and humanize students while integrating ethnic studies curriculum and pedagogy. So with that, we invite you for the first part. So it's a 3-part call to action because we know you all came today to engage with your minds, your body, your heart, your spirit, etc. So the first call to action based on what we've shared before, and you can reflect on any part of these. And actually, we'll use the chat, so feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat box. How might you adapt these goals, essential questions to frame your school year and or we love these multiple part questions as teachers. What goals and essential questions will inform how you launch your school year? How are these goals, essential questions informed by ethnic studies, anti-racist pedagogy, and abolition? So we're going to pause for a few minutes. We recognize we have about an hour together, and this is lifelong work, but we do want to honor the community that's here and give you a moment to pause, reflect, and share with each other. So we'll check out what's happening in the chat box. I see the question here or the comment from Erin, and I always say whatever you feel moved to respond to first. What resonates with you in a particular moment. So we're going to pause for about 2 more minutes for folks to chime in. So someone's asking to go back to the slide with the 4 essential questions. Makes a lot of sense, yeah. What are we responding to? Thank you, Brian. We're going to transition in about 1 minute. Oh, okay, thank you to those who chimed in. I'm going to try to sit with these as we transition. And I think Katie's going to kick us off with thinking about the first essential question.
Yes. All right. Thank you. So we'll start with thinking about who are we? And we includes yourself. So you as a teacher are part of this as well. And it's important to be vulnerable and bring yourself into the classroom as well and share about your own ethnic identity with your students and with your families. So students entering TK are in a critical stage of identity development. My goal is not only to foster self-awareness, but also self-love at the same time. So we begin the year with this multimedia self-portrait project and identity inquiry. Research has shown that 5-year-olds have the same racial attitudes often as adults. They're capable of developing bias and prejudice. So it's important not only to work towards developing self-love and awareness, but also an appreciation of differences between themselves and others. So we begin with this question, who am I? And much of our focus in TK is really on the more concrete aspects of our identity. So what we look like, what do we love, what can we do? And so the photos here show some of my students participating in this multimedia self-portrait project. So you can see here, one of my students was mixing his skin color paints and testing it out against his own skin to make sure that it was the perfect shade of brown for him. Throughout the project, students look in the mirror, like you can see here, to really reflect on what they look like and then accurately portray that in their self-portrait. Children's books also play a big role in this unit. So I consciously select books that are written by authors who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color and have very specific messages about self-identity versus books that have just vague messages about diversity and often promote colorblindness. Students also create poems. This year, their poems were inspired by this book, I'm Every Good Thing, by Derek Barnes. And this video is an example of one of my students reading his poems from this past year.
And give me a thumbs up when I hit play, just to make sure the audio is working.
I am every good thing. I am a good helper and I am a good friend. I am every good thing. I care about my dad, my mom, my brother, and I care about my friends, Miss Katy. I feel happy and I feel hopeful. I am not you. I am every good thing. I could help my parents and I could write my name. I am every good thing. I am me and I am worthy to be loved.
All right, we'll go to the next slide. And here on the next slide is another example of a key project within our identity unit. Students write poems based on the book, The Best Part of Me by Wendy Ewald. They help each other pose to take photos of that part of their body that they selected. And then they create self-portraits and write poems. I'll read one of their poems. It's this student here on the left. The best part of me is my hair. I like my hair because it looks like flowers. My hair is black. It looks like a marshmallow. If I didn't have my hair, I couldn't comb it. The best part of me is my hair. So while the identity unit is very much focused on the outward aspects of students' identity in TK, it paves the way for deeper exploration and connections to our ethnic identities. So even just later on in the year, students might start to make connections like, my hair is brown and wavy because of my Sri Lankan identity. So it really starts to build that awareness that then moves towards a deeper connection to their identities. All right, and I'll pass it to Leah.
All right. I am really honored to be in this space with you all. Well, I teach second grade, just to remind you, and I believe that we support our students by building relationships that actually prioritize racial, cultural, ethnic contributions and stories. By doing so, we are engaging students in collective knowledge of themselves and those who are around them daily. This work extends past the getting to know you surveys that we typically see in elementary classrooms or the student of the week activities that often only reflect superficial attributes or likes and dislikes. We engage students in alternative tasks and are asking the students to think deeply and critically about who they are, how we are all connected, what do we care about, and how we take action that reflects all these things. There are daily protocols that create identity-safe classrooms, and some of you might be familiar with things like morning meeting or iMessages or restorative justice circles. I'm going to share a couple of activities that I use in the beginning of the year to address this first essential question of who we are. So the first activity you might be familiar with, it's called Me Bag, and it's a common activity. You can find it on the internet. Basically, a student takes home a brown paper bag, fills it up with things that represent themselves, and then it's presented in sort of a show and tell type fashion. The change that I make to this popular activity is that students include a picture or a drawing of themselves. And kids like to share baby pictures, but it could just be a picture that they're proud of, a picture or a drawing of their family. And these pictures then hang on our wall in our classroom all year long. And we reference them and we find support and comfort knowing that they're always with us. They're just a part of our daily lives, just as you have pictures in your house. It's also connected to a circle of care. In exchange from the student of the week concept, where typically students make a poster of their favorite things, I introduce a week-long unit called Life Like Mine. So it's LLM up there sometimes. And it changes developmentally with each grade that I have taught. And it's meant to be more inclusive and more active as opposed to that show and tell like structure. So every day begins with the student. So during a typical week on Monday, the student introduces themselves, kids ask questions. Tuesday, they bring objects from their home. Wednesday, the family is invited to visit, and that's always the highlight. Thursday is storytime day, and the child either tells a family story, reads a story to the class, or they can then also invite more family in. And Friday, they share what they've been working on the whole week, which is their Life Like Mine book. And then the students write letters of appreciation and connection back. And over the course of my teaching career, there are 3 questions that are included in this LLM book that have had a large impact on framing the understanding of self. The first one is, I am, and then it's fill in the blank, generation of my family to live in the United States. Now, sometimes this is hard information to find out. Just tell them, you choose any side you want, try your best, and together we get to learn something new. But this question reinforces the idea of ancestors, which is a second grade standard, as well as it introduces the students to the idea that many families, not all, but many, in the United States immigrated to the US from somewhere else. The second question, my family's ancestors came to the United States from the country, countries, states, or land of, follows up with the first question and begins to identify ancestral roots. Finally, the third question, if your family is indigenous to the United States, what tribe or band of people do you belong to? Now, this question establishes that some people did not immigrate or migrate to the United States. It names the word indigenous, and the word is centered in the question. If your family is indigenous to the United States, what tribe or band of people do you belong? For students and families, who often have experienced the world from a place of identifying as American or as white. It might be the first time that they've had to answer a question that they're not the center of something. This question isn't about them. The question is, if your family is indigenous to the United States, what tribe or band of people that you belong to? The responses that I've seen for this question from non-indigenous people have been interesting. Some families cross the question out completely. Some tell their child to skip the question. And some have the students just write in, I'm not indigenous to the United States, which then introduces the idea of where am I indigenous to? And this challenges the American creation on white or whiteness. We are all indigenous to somewhere. I also just point out that I use the term a lot, United States, as opposed to America or United States of America, because I want to give students the visual and the idea that from the northernmost and southernmost points of these two continents, we are all in America. And lastly, I do a whole series of units, one which focuses primarily on identity of self and others. And as we begin to understand self and words to describe self, we start noticing inside and outside qualities and characteristics. We learn how to take notice and listen and learn about how others identify. We practice with the Sesame Street characters or Dora, and then we move to actively listening and learning about each other. From there, we go to group identifiers. We interview an adult in our life and we write a letter to a visitor from outer space. And we describe ourselves using all this language that we've learned. One of the culminating activities this year was the creation of a me slide. So the two links in this slide, one is an example of the me slide. Let's see if I can pull it up. I don't have that power. Oh well. But it changed from sort of a presentation that the kids could share in person to a digitized Google slide. And so that was the me slide, and then the Life Like Mine book. And I will pass to Hannah.
And Leah, were the links that you're speaking of in the speaker notes that we could grab and then Brian could put them in the chat? Is that what you're looking for, or am I on the wrong slide?
No, you're on the right slide.
Okay.
I just don't know why. I mean, maybe, I don't know. They are in the other speaker notes as well.
Okay, we will work on that and we will talk about it at the discussion at the end. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Well, as Leah said, I feel honored to be here amongst incredible educators. And so I'm kind of going to share how I do identity work in 5th grade, knowing that many of my students are coming from incredible educators like Katy and Leah at my own site, doing a lot of work with external identity, doing a lot of work with just portraits and presentation. And so in 5th grade, I begin to build in the levels of intersectional identity. How do all parts of our identity relate? And some of the resources that are on this slide are actually developed from some high school students in my district. I'm going to give them a shout out to Kaylee, Cameron, Zoe, and their advisor, Mr. Barlin. I mean, these are students who developed this set of resources because they felt like their identities were not seen, heard, and validated throughout their K-12 experience. And these students who are currently 12th or incoming 12th graders are actually building a series of lessons for all high school students. And we're following their lead to build it out at the middle school and elementary school level to do identity work in the way that these students of color feels best reflects them, best supports their identity development in our district. So that's just naming where some of these resources come from. But so thinking about the specific identities and intersectional identities for 5th graders, we name various identities for them: nationality, race, ethnicity, religion or spirituality, gender, sexuality, ability status, age, class and socioeconomic status, and more. And it's really important to name all of these things. And I don't expect students to leave 5th grade with a full understanding of all these things. This is our introduction or our second or third viewing of these concepts. And the way we introduce them using this book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell, as well as the resources from those incredible high school students to kind of name and frame what these things are. And this is a really important lesson for students, I think, to begin to see that they have different parts of their identity and that there's different categories, and to begin to think about power structures and systems. This is especially significant because my district is predominantly white. And so having students name identities when they when maybe they've been a part of the dominant identity group their whole life is really significant. Like I'll see students write white ? Cisgender ? And it's really important to name that we all have these various identities, regardless of if it's something we come into 5th grade knowing or if it's something we leave 5th grade knowing. And so I really think it's very significant just to go through all these different categories and have the students begin to think about themselves. And then this is a new activity I'm really excited to try out, the intersectional interactive activity, and these 3 framing questions. The first one is, which identity do you think about the most? Like within these categories, students will have one that stands out to them or one that, you know, that they interface with on a daily basis, maybe they think about. Question number 2 is, which identity do you think is the most misunderstood? And that's beginning to have students think about structures and systems of power, like how maybe it's from their own experiences. It's often from their own experiences that they know what parts of their identities have been misunderstood. And question number 3 is something I'm really excited about. Which of these identities do you feel most empowered by? And I think this is a fantastic question because as we heard Katy and Leah share, self-love is a huge part of identity work. And so giving students the opportunity to say, what part of our identities do we feel empowered by, naming that, and especially as they're old enough in a specific framework, like is which intersectional identity or which combination of identities do you feel empowered by, I think is really, really significant for them. And I think just doing intersectional work with 5th graders is a really great start for them to not only see themselves, but begin to see the world around them. And as we said, we have those 4 questions beginning that flow together. Something that I'm noticing as I was prepping for this presentation is, oh, intersectional identity fits in with the next slide I'm going to share about, and then the next one and the next one. And so kind of this is the foundation for a lot of the work we're doing. And that's why we often start with identity work.
So moving from who are we into how are we connected? So one way that we unpack this question in TK is through a migration unit. This unit takes place later on in the year after we've learned about identity, family, and community. And here are the essential questions that guide the unit. So we start with, who were the first people to live here on this land? Where do I live now? And where did my family used to live? What keeps people in and other people out? Why do people move? What is the individual experience of being a newcomer? And how does valuing people from many different places make our community stronger? So students develop an understanding that we are connected to each other and that our families all moved to San Leandro at some point, with the exception of course, the Ohlone peoples. So this unit celebrates migration and immigration at a time when in our socio-political climate, it's really hostile towards immigrants. So we learn about the Ohlone people, starting with who were the first people to live here, not just as the original people, but also still part of our present day community. Through family interviews and interviews with newcomer middle school students, students develop empathy for the experience of being a newcomer. And finally, they write their own Where I'm From poems, where they foster a connection between where their family is from and where they currently are now. And this video shows just one of my students finding where his family is from on the map and where he still has family that lives there, and then drawing a line to San Leandro where he lives now. So maps are a big part of this unit. And we can watch this video.
I take an airplane to Manila, Philippines, and also my other family are at Manila, Philippines.
So he drew a line from San Leandro to Manila, Philippines, and he had actually been there before as well. So he was talking about flying on an airplane to get there. All right, I'll pass it off to Leah.
All right. So in second grade, as we begin to understand how we are connected and co-create an identity-safe classroom, we really focus on being vulnerable, and that I even have to be vulnerable in order to create this classroom, and the sense that each child's interests and skills are valid and have a place. So we begin to build these connections through sharing self in this lesson that I call We Are Beautiful Because, and we focus on learning about multiple intelligences and figuring out what kind of smart we are or how best we can learn. One thing I always emphasize is that we're all living things, and because we are alive, we are always growing and changing, even me. And I emphasize this to recognize that today we have one strength and tomorrow we might have another, that learning is not static. The picture on the slide is the bulletin board that we create to showcase our diversity and our strengths. I also take the class through continuing from identity, then I focus in on equity, a series of lessons around equity, with the understanding that equity is when everyone gets what they need. Equity is also known as being fair. This helps with the schoolyard argument, that's just not fair. Yeah, and it helps build empathy and create safe spaces for us all. So there's some quotes for our examples of some of the students' thoughts. So one says, right now it's good. Oh, this is based off this lesson, I'm sorry. So these quotes are coming from a lesson on equity where I had the students evaluate our playground, our physical plant, think about, go through, my links aren't there. I'm sorry, you guys, I will get you the links. Go through the physical school building and see if it's inviting to all, right? So one student said, right now it's good, but that's because we don't have students who use a wheelchair. If we did have students who use wheelchairs, we would need ramps and play structures. And then to push back on the students, would having ramps create a more inclusive community, and how? So those are ways that these lessons open up the doors and push their thinking. And then they begin to ask questions like, who is missing from this, right? And how do we bring their voices in? So that's how I teach how we are connected. And I will pass it to Hannah.
Wonderful, thank you. And so building upon, again, all the wonderful work that colleagues are doing, TK through 4th with students, I kind of take a slightly different angle with how are we connected. And this is one of my favorite lessons I do at the beginning of each school year. It's a Labor Day lesson that I have adapted from Teaching Tolerance, which is now called Learning for Justice. And it has students rank jobs in levels of importance for Labor Day. So they have this list of 25 jobs and they get to say, what is important? And for me, the goal of this lesson is that we begin to value labor. We begin to see like the dignity in various sorts of labor and how we are connected, even to folks who we can't see or folks we don't assume are part of our day-to-day existences. And so just to highlight a few responses from students this year. And I think it was also really interesting to do this activity in the time of COVID, especially when students have been hearing a lot about essential workers. And I noticed that the conversation about essential workers did really impact students' responses to see the connectivity that we have to those around us. Again, even if to see that our community is larger than the people who we might assume. And so there's 3 categories at the bottom. One is sanitation workers. And out of the students who responded, 90% of students said that sanitation workers are kind of or very important. And then the next category is store clerks. And out of the students who responded, 94.8 said that a store clerk is a kind of or very important job. And so kind of seeing that our connectedness is built into those folks around us and those folks who support us in support the runnings of our communities. And so I think this is a really interesting activity for connectivity. And then the last one is artist, which I just thought was interesting. I believe that 85% of students said that artists were kind of a really important, and I hadn't had students say that in the past. And so I think it was also kind of a reframing in the pandemic of how are we connected? What do we need to connect, to feel whole, to thrive and survive? And then the level that how intersectional identity kind of builds into this is when we think about labor and dignity, especially in the context of wildfires, which are becoming a very common occurrence in the fall of our school year. And so I discuss with my students, we talk and think about how we're impacted by wildfires, but also how folks across the state are impacted, and specifically folks in agricultural communities, many of whom are folks of colors or immigrants. And so we think about how intersectional identities, how we're all connected, we're all impacted by being in California and being impacted by wildfires, but how how we're reliant on each other and how other folks are navigating this in different ways. And so it's become, we ended up, it's become a really interesting part of the fall to kind of build in visible labor connectivity into discussions of wildfires and intersectional identities. And I'll pass it back to Katy.
So I'll chime in quickly, just another reminder to pause. And you all have been excellent at using the chat throughout and sharing your thoughts and reflections. And when we do the discussion at the end, we'll come back to these questions and any questions you might have. But in the interest of time, we are going to kick it off to Katy, but this is the second call to action question. So I invite you to pause for a moment. Sit with this one as we continue with the last two essential questions.
All right. Hopefully everyone had a chance to read it. Okay. Thank you, Brian, for putting in the chat. All right. So moving from who are we, how are we connected now into what do we care about? So what you see here are excerpts from a caregiver survey that I developed as I began teaching and wanted to find a way to integrate ethnic studies into my curriculum, but I wasn't really sure where to start, especially with my students. They're 4 when they start the school year. So they're often not able to verbalize their own ethnic identity. And so I really wanted to not make assumptions and actually find out from their caregivers how they identify and whether they're talking with their child about their ethnic identity. So I usually give the survey to families, either I send it to them at the beginning of the year, or we discuss these questions at our first conference. And caregivers are surprised at first to be asked some of these questions. It's often the first time that they're being asked to reflect within the context of the public school system on their own identity, not just their child, but also their own memories of school. And it can bring up some painful memories. And it gives them a chance to really share what they want for their child as well. It allows me to take note of the information and utilize it and build connections with students. So when a certain holiday comes up or something that we're learning about in the curriculum, I can make connections and say, hey, you know, your mom told me that you do this too, or this is something that your family does. What can we learn more about? What do you know that you can share about this? So again, it allows me not to make assumptions or stereotypes, but rather know specifics about each family. Next slide. And the survey also informs the curriculum. So for example, the response to this question, what understandings would you like your child's teacher to have about your child's ethnic identity or culture? This parent wrote, my family is very important for Filipinos. Family is not just the immediate family, but friends are also considered and treated as family. So this can really inform the way that the teacher is going to then teach about family. So for example, I have the students bring in a photo of their family and we put it up on the wall throughout our family unit. Well, it's not just one photo of their nuclear family that I'm asking for. I really made it clear, bring in photos of anyone that you consider family. So knowing this about specific families and about your students can really then inform your curriculum. And pass it to Leah. I'm sorry, Hannah.
Yeah, I think this is the one where we go out of order because this is one beautiful thing that comes with meeting with other teachers and being in an educational community. Katy developed this incredible survey that's kind of now spread. And so my district picked up this survey in this past year and kind of did some framing and shifting of it. And as I said earlier, my district is predominantly white. The teaching staff is predominantly white. And so the kind of the way this survey was used and was even worked on, I think kind of had a dual purpose. Like if you read the text, like this was a new board policy that came out. And so this was like, there was so much power in sitting with other educators to adapt the survey for our community And I think like that was just, you know, as much as this is supporting our families and our connection and collaboration between families and the educational community, it was supporting educators and sifting through identity, because again, many of them might not have been asked to reflect or might not have thought about what sorts of questions they would want to ask families in ways they'd want to communicate. And there were pros and cons. This ended up being used at all the elementary schools in my site. And it's beautiful that the ideas are spreading, and also it's something to navigate if it's taken out of, if it's taken and used by others, the sorts of questions or the ways it's being used. And a big thing about our survey is it names our pedagogy at the beginning of the year. It says, hey, these are our goals and of doing ethnic studies and anti-racist work and identity work. Like, this is what we're going for. And naming that for families, and some families are all on board with it. And some families say, hey, that's not for us. And all of that is really significant information to know. And we can go to the next slide, because I think we email out the survey, but I think there's huge power. It felt like there was so much more communication happening when folks are even asked these questions about themselves than otherwise. And so, like, a few questions I highlighted: do you specifically talk to your child about their ethnic identity or culture? What understandings do you want your child's teacher to have? And how important of it is to incorporate aspects of your child's identity and others? And for like many white families, so they sit and they're like, you know, we don't really talk, or we kind of talk, or we talked in the context of this year, but hadn't talked before. And for many families of color, it gave an opportunity to share things that I don't know if I would have been able, you know, that hadn't come up before in conversation with families, sharing, you know, their experiences of living in this town and what it means for them. And it helps the teacher and, you know, myself build collaboration, community, and empathy for students and family experiences. And the last quotes on this slide are just about I work in a really specific context. And so we ask questions about belonging, about feeling connected to each other, and hearing families share about that is super significant, because it's I work in an enclave community, and that's has a very homogenous socioeconomic community. And so it's just very interesting to kind of get to ask these things and have people share in a way that feels open and authentic, that can help create community between the educational community and families, and also inform practices throughout the year.
I'll bring us back to the kids. So I hope that we're beginning to see how it spirals, how the first EQ is building up to the second EQ and moving through. So when I think about, you know, the third EQ, what do we care about and why? And the essential understanding being analyze the roots of systemic oppression and how they occur both past and present. How do we get that to kids in a lesson form that they can start wrapping their minds around this? So definitely I start by asking ourselves, are there any things or actions or events that you notice that you don't think are fair and acceptable? We have conversations about how that makes you feel. Again, this all builds upon empathy and how we are connected, who is seen and who's not seen in the problem or the solution. But within my classroom, we don't just end there with simply identifying what concerns us in our community. We actually take that care and we let it evolve into action, right? So we use the mini unit that I created around power to get us into that action space. And I use the unit so that students can feel empowered by the act of care, by their sense of care. So that, that caring about others, we can take an action towards a more humanizing world. And we define this power from power unit as the ability to control circumstances or make things happen. So if a person has power, it means they can make things happen in the way that they want to. And we point out that power is neither good nor bad. It totally depends on how it's used. We relate it to fire, and we got that definition from the Power book. And so, of course, we start with self, where they notice power. And so I have some examples here. Josh, one student wrote, Josh has the power of me when we play Madden because it's his computer. Or Olivia has the power when my parents leave because she's the oldest kid in the family. So students are starting to self-evaluate where they see power and what is power within the structure so that we can dismantle it. Ms. Aguilera has power when she makes the rules for our classroom. I have power to make decisions for lunch. And by combining what we care about, recognizing that we have power and understanding what that is, then we start activating our radical imagination. And I introduced them to the Oakland Mural project. If you've driven around 880 underneath the overpasses, you'll see some beautiful murals that were created by Oakland students. And the Oakland Mural project cultivates, and these are their words, they say they cultivate, educate, and engage youth in community issues and solutions through power of public art. And they have a unit on superheroes, and I do have that link, and I will share the links. I think my slide deck, I didn't update it quick enough, so I apologize, but I will get it to you. So this picture right here was of one student's superhero, and her issue that she was very concerned about was hunger. And so this superhero happens to be a robot, and she makes food in her tummy to solve world hunger. And there's no link. I will get you the link to the others. Another student wrote, the name of my superhero is Antonisha, and I will solve the problem of old houses getting thrown away. To solve this problem, I will have the power of remodeling old houses by flying over them for a little while and sprinkling dust on them. The symbols that will represent me are sparkling wind and tiny bits of sparkly snowflakes. This is important for me to solve this problem because people without homes could live there. And I will pass it to Katy.
All right, so we're moving into our last essential question. How do we take action? So action emerges in different ways in response to what's happening in the wider community. But usually in TK, we do tend to move towards action at the latter part of the school year. But this year it was different. This really authentic project emerged from the teachers actually writing a letter to the district leadership and the school board to change the name of our school. So we decided to develop a project-based learning unit for our whole school related to learning about, we started with why is your own name important, then moving into how do schools get their names, why would a community want to change their school's name? We looked into other schools that had gone through the process. What are some important places and people in our community's history that we could honor with our new name? And that's what you're seeing here on the slide is a few screenshots from our ABC San Leandro. It's almost like a book in a slideshow format that I developed for our youngest students to learn about both people and places in nature in San Leandro that we could rename our school after. And finally, the students got to choose what they would name the school. And this photo shows our outdoor gallery with both murals. So each student designed a mural of based on the name that they chose. And then they also wrote, depending on their grade level, they wrote about why they thought that that should be the name. So through the PBL, students not only uncovered local histories, but they also reflected on who we are as a school community. And it was important not to just critically reflect on the current name, but also how we can truly embody our school identity in the new name. All right, and I believe Leah is next. Yeah.
All right. How do we take action? So sometimes action happens for us at the start of the year, like I experienced in the 2016 election. Or there are times when the call to action spirals just upon itself. And as I think about the question, what gives the action meaning and purpose? I'm reminded that action can just simply be a thoughtful conversation and a new way of responding to a situation, or it could be a loud protest, right? There's the breadth of what action can be is so wide. The call to action is really empowering students' voice to recognize oppression and resistance, that they can move themselves and our communities towards liberation. And these calls to actions can be so many examples, right? Interviews, research studies. I'm currently working on a third grade project to do Black and Asian solidarity movements. One time the students noticed that there were not enough boys of color in our library, so they made a list of books and brought it over to the librarian. That's action, right? Teaching about Banned Book Week, that's action. Inviting speakers into your classroom and family members, that's action, that's engaging. And let's see if any of these, I put these in different slides. So one of them is the BLM movement, and that happened in the wake of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders. And that the height of that here in Oakland happened at the last week of teaching. So I ended up having to make this a summer lesson, and I invited all of the second grade going into third grade to come and be a part of this summer lesson group with me. And I was pretty impressed. I would say about between 40 and 50 students participated. But that could only have been built because of the work that we did in the springtime around identity and power and equity and privilege and oppression, resistance to liberation. And so some of those I've shared. So the work of the BLM, that actually then led the entire school the following year to implement the BLM curriculum and culminated in the BLM Week of Action. So the schoolwork also spread to the parent population. So our PTO, our SPTO, organized the adults around the BLM Week of Action. And in some ways, I was kind of like a pilot curriculum, but my success led to the trust, and then it just got larger and larger. And so the picture on the bottom is after the 2016 election. The BLM, can we go to the next slide? This one was also after the 2016 election. And this is just an example of one of my students. I'll bring her into the space. Her name is Leah, and she was responding to the travel ban that was put in place. And she just writes, I will make that change at recess. I will gather some kids' names and some adult names, and I will make a protest with my friends, and hopefully it will work. She wanted to see her family, and so she wanted to take part in that. And then, can you go to the next one? These are pictures from, the one before. These are pictures from our community mural walk right after, and some of the lessons the lessons were staged outdoors in Oakland, and families came as well. The little guy at the very corner, his name is Leo, and I would love to end this piece with a poem, a speech that Leo wrote himself. And I think what's neat about Leo's speech is you can tell the work that he had to do to get to this place, the work that he had to do with identity, all the way through our EQs. And he brought his camera, he took notice of this. So Brian, that link that I sent you, if it's not there of the video, is there a way we can play that?
Yeah, did you want us to play it in the webinar, or did you want to have folks open it up on their own devices?
They could see it right now. It's short, it's very short.
Okay.
And I think it's a great example.
Yes,
Becca, do you want to change your screen share? Do you have the link?
There we go. Sorry. My screen was not responding to me. Yes, I will pull that up in just one moment.
So Leo, I'll tell you, here we go.
Okay.
Leo came to the classes and just started taking notes. And I noticed that he was deeply moved by this work and then taking pictures. And then over this summer, he wrote this piece and presented it to the whole school.
All right. And can you see the Loom screen or no?
No.
Oh, there we go.
Would you like me to try to share?
There we go.
Okay,
Are we good now?
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Here's
Sorry
Leo.
about
Here's Leo.
My name is Leo Lillian. I'm in the 3rd grade this year, and I will be performing an original piece called BLM by me. Rode my bike downtown to meet my class, to see the murals, to touch the murals on wooden boards, covering the windows, covering the doors. Used my camera. I saw the memorial. George Floyd lives in us, the sign said. Oakland for justice, end all racism, Black Panthers, and BLM. They said Breonna Taylor, resist, protect. Big, colorful, all different, meaningful, just plain cool. The art, it meant something. I was inspired. But when you really think about it, it's terrifying. Black people getting killed has to stop. We have to stop it because Black lives matter to all of us.
And I will get that other item on. I'm losing my Zoom edge here.
I'll kind of jump in because I'm coming next, but I also think Leah sharing Leo's work really touches upon what I'm thinking about as action. For many of our students, specifically white students, we do these actions, these letter writing, these protests, and the action that is actually happening, as well as us doing these tangible things, is the action of learning and unlearning. And I think that's the most powerful part for myself as an educator is we can do these larger actions so that the internal actions happen. And the way I know my students are learning is when they share, when they're able to apply knowledge to a new situation. When we're studying, when we've talked about how LGBTQ plus people face marginalization, and then we're doing a project about the Declaration of Independence, and someone says, hey, did LGBTQ people exist back then? Do you think they were treated fairly? Like when they're able to transfer this knowledge, so those larger actions become their new learning. And oftentimes those learning comes up in those small moments of conversation or sharing. We had this big debate in my class about why Black Lives Matter, why that phrase is important. And the students were having a hard time separating Black Lives Matter from All Lives Matter. But then a few days later, one of my students' Black Lives Matter sign was vandalized. And like the police came to their house, it's a very small town. And then the students came back and we brought back that conversation and were able to dig into it deeper. It's such an iterative process, this taking action. And so I'm trying to build off of Leo's incredible work. I have a little video of students as well. The city I teach in passed a resolution to have every school hang the pride flag in the month of June. And there was a lot of hesitation at my site to do that. So I volunteered my students. I said, why don't we make a video? We've been talking about LGBTQ plus identity in formal and informal ways throughout the years. Again, it's iterative. It's things we come back to over and over again in moments that are teacher-led and moments that are student-led. And so here's a little video of what some students came up with when I said, hey, do you want to make a video for our school? So the video was shared with all of the students about the pride flag.
In the LGBTQ plus flag, white, pink, and blue represents transgender. You might not know what that means. Well, I can tell you. Transgender sounds like two words, trans, which is transition, and gender is what you feel like, girl, boy, or kid. So if you put those words together, it means that what your gender is does not match your body part that you were born with. For example, if you were born with a boy's body part and you feel like a girl, you would be a transgender girl.
The pride flag is part of Black and Brown because we need to recognize the contribution that Black and Brown activists did for LGBTQ+.
That was Azara and Luca, and Quinn and Quentin also made part of the video that I'm not showing. But I think for me, this is action because it's something we've been coming back to throughout the year. Anytime it came up, anytime we wanted it to come up, and those were all their own words. Like I just said, hey, here's a piece of paper, and like they came up with that. And you know, it's limited, it is focused on a binary, but knowing that the students are fitting this into their own mental schema, knowing they're making this for younger students, for me, it was quite powerful action. So I'm going to pass it back to Wanda.
Okay, so I know we're a little bit over time, but what is time anyway? You know, I like to honor people's time, but Katy, Leah, Hannah had some things to share. And I'm just grateful and honored that we get to be in community with each other and sharing ideas. And as you've seen, they inspire each other. They inspire me as well. And so we have this last piece of the call to action. And we invite you to sit with this question. And as we move into discussion, we can discuss. You'll have access to these slides. I think these are questions we take very seriously, and we come back to them as a community of educators as well. For us, we've discussed our purpose as ethnic studies teachers, why we value this. And a part of it is that it needs to be the norm. And so we see it as an ethnic studies movement. And in that ethnic studies movement, with all of the backlash today, we think it's important to start at the TK level. And you got to see today at how young people, 3-4 years old, can engage with these meaningful questions. And so we invite you to continue to come back to these slides, to reach out to us, to engage with this work, and to be a part of this ethnic studies movement. And I can't thank Katy, Leah, Hannah, the other people who have been a part of the Elementary Ethnic Studies project enough, and taking back this power. I think the students, the families, all of these examples really speak to themselves, and I hope that it empowered folks today. You feel inspired, motivated. I often have teacher candidates say to me, you know, like, I'm down, I get it, but the bureaucracy, will I have the freedom to do this? And I'm like, you have no choice. You know, take that freedom, claim your freedom, because our lives depend on it. So again, thank you to everyone who were in community with us today, and we hope to continue to build and hopefully see you in the discussion.
As I find my unmute button. Thank you so much, Dr. Watson, and to Hannah, and to Leah, and to Katy. I am in awe of, I mean, the student-led work alone, and then all these different things that you shared with us today. Just amazing work, and you are making such an impact. So as we transition, as I'm trying to, you know, just deal with all my exciting thoughts in my brain, I feel very, you know, inspired. We are going to transition to our discussion room, and we will open up space for Q&A. We can also unpack some of the questions in the presentation. And then for anyone accessing the presentation at a later time, there also is that resources slide in there too. So I encourage everyone to take a look at the resources that have also been provided in there. So thank you to our amazing presenters today. And thank you to all of our attendees as well. We hope to see you in the discussion room. And I think Brian popped the link in there for our discussion room where we are heading to next. There it is. So thank you very much.